We've already seen a wide range of measures to reduce energy use. In the business sector, the EU Emissions Trading Scheme, the Climate Change Levy, and the Climate Change Agreements all provide incentives for greater energy efficiency. In 2010, we will see the Carbon Reduction Commitment, a compulsory trading scheme for large, non-energy intensive businesses and public sector organisations. On the residential front, the new carbon emissions reduction target obliges energy suppliers to deliver energy efficiency improvement measures to households. After 2011, the government will introduce a supplier's obligation that aligns the incentives of energy companies with a reduction in demand through the development of energy services markets. In addition, all new homes in England will be zero carbon from 2016, and all other new buildings from 2019. In the transport sector, there will be compulsory emissions targets for new cars. It seems to be an impressive list of initiatives that will save us a lot of energy. But because of the need to hit the EU 2020 renewables energy target, we can expect to see even more energy-saving measures set up in the medium to near future. Using every unit of energy as efficiently as possible has to be our ultimate ambition. This may lead to an absolute reduction in energy demand in the longer term. In the meantime, we also have to ensure that the energy that we do create is generated as cleanly and efficiently as possible. Because renewable power is more expensive to generate than power from fossil fuel, energy producers have no basic commercial incentive to use greener sources. To stimulate investment in renewable technologies, the government and the EU introduced a renewable obligation, or RO. Generating companies are obliged to produce an increasing proportion of their power from renewable sources. In return, they are awarded renewable obligation certificates. If they don't generate enough from renewables, the shortfall has to be made up by buying certificates from Ofgem. The money that Ofgem collects is then distributed between the companies that have met their RO in full. This means that companies that don't meet their RO pay a penalty to their competitors. Initially, the RO was set at 1 ROC. So, 1 renewable energy certificate was awarded for every megawatt hour generated, regardless of technology or location. The effect of having this single original level of banding was to promote the deployment of easier, cheaper technology. Inevitably, this placed an emphasis on low-hanging fruit, such as onshore wind. This has now changed, and companies are rewarded more for using less established technologies such as wave, tidal stream, anaerobic digestion, gasification, pyrolysis, dedicated biomass, and geothermal energy. With ROC banding for these projects set at 2, these projects become financially very attractive, as this is equivalent to 7 pence a kilowatt hour before the output is even sold. With this sort of incentive, we will see a range of different renewable energy sources connected into the grid. Take onshore wind. There are currently fewer than 200 onshore wind farms in the UK, producing about 2.5% of the national energy requirement. By 2020, that figure will probably increase by 700%, with most of the farms in Scotland. Planning, grid, supply chain and financial issues will be the key constraints on this growth. Offshore turbines are more expensive to erect and install than those on land, but they tend to be far more powerful. The UK already has the world's highest deployment of offshore power generation, but we can expect to see generating capacity rise significantly. Some estimates say the UK could be generating almost 1/3 of its electricity power from offshore wind by 2020. There is also energy to be had from biomass, renewable fuel from organic matter. In 2006, about 2.3% of electricity generated in the UK was from biomass, including electricity generated from landfill gas, sewage gas, wood and specially grown energy crops. Landfill gas is currently the most significant source of biomass-based renewable generation in the UK, but the potential growth is small in the short term as most large landfill sites are already being exploited and may decline in future as existing sites are depleted. Further growth in biomass electricity generation is likely to be sourced from waste or energy crops. Though the potential for biomass in the grid is small, it has a much more important role to play in providing heat and power in the built environment, as we'll see later. Hydropower has seen few advances since the 80s, and there are a few sites in the UK that would permit large-scale development. The 100 megawatt plant at Loch Ness that is currently under construction may be the last in Scotland. However, we may see an increase in the number of small schemes that connect into the grid. Finally, there is wave and tidal, And while we're surrounded by water, the level of generation from wave and tidal power has always been negligible. Tidal range, which exploits the difference in water height at high and low tide by impounding water at high tide and holding it in lagoons for release through turbines at low tide, is a proven technology. The potential for tidal range generation is great, and while it's not achievable in the short term, the government is looking, for example, at the feasibility of a 7 tidal barrage system that could generate between 4 and 7% of the UK's electricity requirement. I've explained about the incentives for sustainable energy, but where is the funding for these renewable obligations going to come from? Well, we all know there is no such thing as a free lunch. The cost of the subsidies is going to come from heavy taxation on energy derived from fossil-based fuels. This is going to be a familiar scenario. In the one hand, we see a bunch of carrots, incentives for those who create renewable energy. In the other, there will be a fearsome stick, financial penalties for those who don't. First, the good news. The government expects that these fossil-based taxes will have a positive effect on how much renewable energy is used to generate electricity. Now the bad news. Even with the UK achieving 32% renewable electricity, domestic electricity bills are expected to rise additionally between 9 and 15% by 2020 and by 10 to 16% for the industrial sector. Now the worst news. The price of gas will go up even more. Achieving the target of 14% renewable heat will see a domestic gas bill rise by between 18 and 37% by 2020. Even this huge increase is dwarfed by the projected rise of industrial prices, a staggering 24 to 49% by 2020. The Carbon Reduction Commitment, or CRC, is an innovative climate change and energy saving scheme for the UK. It will encourage improvements in energy efficiency that can save organisations money. The scheme has been designed to increase awareness in large organisations and to change the way they operate. The scheme is also a central part of the UK's strategy for controlling carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions. It will tackle CO2 emissions not already covered by climate change agreements and the EU emissions trading scheme. This will help reduce the country's carbon footprint to deliver the ambitious emissions reduction targets set in the government's Climate Change Act. The scheme will start in April 2010. Big businesses, those using more than 6,000 megawatt hours a year, will have to account for all the carbon used in their businesses from all energy sources. For the first 3 years of the scheme, businesses will pay the Department of Energy and Climate Change £12 per tonne for carbon emissions. The businesses with the lowest level of emissions will qualify for the highest level of rebates. After 3 years, what is known as a cap and trade auction scheme will then be introduced. The new CRC regulations make it clear that businesses can either trade their ROCs or claim the carbon saved against their overall footprint, but not both. Organisations that up to now have claimed that they were completely carbon neutral will suddenly find they are now assessed using entirely fossil fuels, and that accordingly they have a massive carbon footprint. To get around this, major businesses in the UK, such as Tesco and BT, have been looking at creating their own wind farms. However, they have been told that if they claim a renewable obligation, the power they use from that source will be assessed as being full fossil fuel, no matter how it was generated. Government's position is that claiming renewable obligation certificates and selling energy to grid is in effect double counting. They are saying you can't profit from selling the electricity and claim that you are reducing your carbon footprint at the same time. BT and Tesco's responses have been to pull the plug on their planned developments. The matter is not yet closed, and no doubt we'll be hearing a lot more about this issue in the near future.